Hello folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. So earlier on, I sat through 1 hour and 4 minutes of the Piers Morgan interview of Benn and Chris Eubank Jr., or if you prefer, Chris Eubank Jr. and Benn. It's 1 hour and 4 minutes that I won't get back, and it was in places it was interesting, but in places it was just more of the same. And I then went on Porky's Corner with Russ to talk about various aspects of this. Porky asked me a bunch of questions, and I did my best to answer. I'm not going to spend 1 hour and 4 minutes going over it for us here. There were a few little interesting bits. I think the thing that I found most interesting is that in my own head now, this is presuming that there is a real sort of dispute or beef between them. It might well be the case that this is all bogus, all bullshit, and it's all acting. There's always that possibility. But if there is a real issue, it really boils down to Chris Eubank Jr. thinks Benn is a drug cheat. And Benn just keeps reiterating the fact is that I've been cleared 3 times by people that are smarter than you, etc., etc., etc. He, being Benn, doesn't want to answer a question about how did they clomiphene get in your system. Whereas Chris Eubank Jr. is adamant that however it got in, it's your fault. He even said at one point in time, if he with his own eyes saw Benn being pinned down and somebody taking a hypodermic needle and jabbing it into their bum and putting the substance in, he, Eubank, would still blame Benn because he says that you have to defend yourself at all time. You have an unshakable responsibility to ensure that everything that goes into your body is above board. So really, this boils down to, as the lawyers would say, the difference between absolute liability and strict liability. As we know, most people will know, if you don't, I'll skate over it very quickly. Absolute liability is one of those offences where the only thing a prosecution needs to prove is that an unlawful act or omission occurred. No need to prove intent. No defence of due diligence or accident. So an example is failing to stop at a stop sign. You know, if the cops see you, you haven't stopped at a stop sign, it don't matter. Whether you say, oh, I didn't see it, I was busy, all these things, right? You failed to stop, you didn't stop, that's an absolute liability offence. The only thing they've got to prove is that you didn't stop. Strict liability, on the other hand, which is a common regulatory offence, the prosecution only needs to prove that the thing occurred or the omission occurred, but the accused, so if you're in trouble for doing something that's a strict liability offence, you can rely upon what's known as the defence of due diligence. You can say, oh, I did everything I could. I mean, I did all the training or whatever is the offence, right? And an example would be careless driving. You can say, well, I wasn't careless, a bee stung my ear, there's lots of things, right? So one is called strict liability and the other is called absolute liability. People often get them conflated. People often think strict liability is, you done it, there's no getting off. Well, in strict liability, you do have certain defences. Absolute liability, you're foobarred. So I think that's where Chris Eubank's mind is. Chris Eubank's mind is that taking of PEDs is an absolute liability offence. It's in your system. It don't matter how it got in your system. It don't matter if you were, sleeping. It don't matter whatever. The fact is, it's in your system. It's your problem. you're a cheat. I mean, and I think, again, if this is a real beef, I think that's Chris Eubank's sort of unshakable position. And he did say that, he wants to make an example of Conor Benn. He said, I'm not going to shake your hand. I want to hold this out as an example, that if you take drugs, your life is finished, your life is ruined, and I'm going to make an example of you. So, I mean, that's his position, right? It's a position that many people will support, and it's a position that some people might say is too harsh. In a sport where taking of PEDs can give you an advantage and you could potentially kill or at least badly injure somebody, I think most people have, most people would have sympathy for Chris Eubank's thinking on this. And he also said that he, being Chris Eubank, wants to make a statement that if you cheat, you'll get exposed and punished. And Conor Benn is, saying, well, look, I got cleared. So there's a position between these two fighters that can't be reconciled. And so that, would suggest that there's a real beef. I mean, it's so hard to tell, right? What is narrative, what is puffery, what is marketing, and what is real? I don't know. I don't know either fighters. Never met them. I will say that as far as the interview was concerned, I thought that Chris Eubank came across as the more composed, the more mature, and the more mentally strong of the two. He kind of, but not quite to the same extent as in the press conference, he kind of controlled the interview. Piers Morgan, who of course is a very, very accomplished interviewer on these sort of shows, did his best, but Chris Eubank there wasn't any give in Chris Eubank. Conor Benn, on the other hand, he switched from being, rather likable at times when he was suggesting that I hope that you, Chris Eubank, can reconcile with your father. I want to beat you in the ring, but I want to knock you unconscious, but I want you to get up and be fine afterwards and carry on with your life. That would be his likable side, to really unlikable and somewhat reactive, somewhat explosive, possibly. There was a point in time where both fighters got up and started sort of, moving towards each other, and the security guards moved in. To me, that didn't feel authentic, though Conor Benn is an interesting study, was particularly whenever his father, Nigel Benn, is mentioned. He does then appear to be, genuinely pissed off. It's so hard to say, really. Eubank also made an interesting observation that was quite sort of cutting, I suppose. And it was one of these sort of, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree kind of things, where he suggested that that Nigel Benn knew his son Conor was a drug cheat. And he postulated that it was possible that Nigel Benn himself may have been a cheat. That sort of, like father, like son, like father kind of thing. Which is the first time I've heard Eubank Jr. say that. And then there was some argy-bargy about, the press conference and how Nigel Benn had put his hands on Chris Eubank Jr.'s throat, and if you do that again, you won't get your hand back. And then Conor Benn leaping to the defense of his father, of course. And that sort of left me a bit cold. And then there was talk about world championships. And Conor Benn said, you're an old man, your career's over, you're an old age pensioner, and you haven't won anything. And Eubank Jr. said that, I'm a 3-time IBO world champion. Piers Morgan said, well, isn't that some sort of interim belt? And Eubank said, no, 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 those are real belts, real world titles, and sort of, hanging his hat on the IBO as being equally prestigious as WBC and IBF, etc. I think most boxing fans sort of would raise an eyebrow or two at listening to that. So there we go. There's 10 minutes of a brief synopsis of 1 hour and 4 minutes with Piers Morgan. Let me know what you think about this particular storyline. Is it a storyline that interests you? Is it a storyline that seems authentic? Is it a storyline that you think is narrative and BS to sell tickets? I think I can speak for most serious fans that we're not super interested in this because they're not like it's a bit of a gimmick fight. But I think a lot of people will tune in. Let me know what you think. Your thoughts are more important on this than mine. I'm just the guy who's given up an hour of his time to watch a show which was interesting in places, but possibly in other places not so much. Thanks very much. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and have a fabulous day.